Many of you know David Porter in his role, I can't say his name, Porter, in his role as Executive Director of BCcampus, a position he has held since 2003. He took the position at BCcampus with the mandate to create a web-based suite of services that British Columbia's 25 public post-secondary institutions could use to enhance their online learning capabilities. A lot has happened in that time. He's a longtime advocate for the benefits of adapting new technology to deliver educational opportunities. David was uniquely qualified to lead the BCcampus in achieving its vision for creating a collaborative online learning agency that supports us as one of BC's public post-secondary institutions. David also has extensive experience in the education and training fields, which has included working with both public and private sector organizations in Canada. He's worked for a number of private and public sector organizations, and he's also been a project manager for industry-based projects in Canada and the US, and has worked as a project leader and a consultant for international projects, most recently in Mongolia, Vietnam, Malaysia, and India. So given that impressive list of capabilities and background, join me in welcoming David Porter.
Thanks, everyone. It's really a pleasure to be here this afternoon with you, and it was the excitement and was palpable this morning. Everyone was really engaged in the opening session. It clearly struck a chord and resonated with everyone around the values that we bring to teaching and learning. And it really showed that open and ideas of that sort resonate across institutions in every faculty and discipline. What I'd like to do is talk a little bit more about how this works at a systemic level and what's happening systemically and why we need to gear up for new approaches to working with students and working with our colleagues, not only within our institution, but in other institutions as well. Recently, I was asked to speak to all of the presidents of universities and colleges in British Columbia. That's one of those unique opportunities you get once in a blue moon. They gave me 7 minutes, no slides, and my task was a story starter. I was to give them a story starter so that they could have a discussion on massive online open courses. And it was really easy to actually begin that conversation with them. I used a quote from one of their colleagues at Stanford who said, I can't tell you exactly how it's going to break. He meant the tsunami of opportunity in front of us, but my goal is to surf it, not just stand there. And I think it was pretty clear in the room that many of the presidents in our institutions are facing that pressure. And many of them who were there to talk about massive online open courses, the ministry thought would be their first conversation about it, had already been on a lot of MOOCs themselves. At least 3 presidents put up their hand and said, I've been on 3 different MOOCs. Some in my discipline, some in other disciplines, because they really felt the need to know what was going on out there. And I'm sure you're doing some of that yourself these days, exploring what's happening well beyond the borders of your institution to figure out what the future might look like for you and your colleagues. Last year in the EDUCAUSE review, a CIO from a large university in the US wrote a paper called The 4 Beyonds. And what he was talking about was 4 forces that were gearing up out there in the education space that he believed would begin to have impact in institutions directly well before we expected them to. And so he called them the 4 Beyonds: beyond textbooks, beyond bookstores, beyond learning management systems, beyond school. And what he meant with beyond school was not the physical place, but the opportunity to learn well beyond the borders of the institution that you're a part of, and possibly bring back that learning for credit in your own institution. A totally different way of thinking. And that really is fueled by the access to open educational resources these days, and the opportunities presented when you have things like MOOCs and large libraries of open resources and mobile devices on which to view them and learn from them. I'm sure our students are out there all the time looking for alternative pathways to the courses and programs that we offer, and are using many of these opportunities to learn themselves. And so what we need to figure out is how we harness these kinds of beyond conversations and at least have these conversations before we're confronted with them much more directly. I was thinking back before I did this presentation. I used to watch the Rocky and Bullwinkle show, and I just loved the Wayback Machine. And Brewster Kahle and the guys at the Internet Archive built a kind of Wayback Machine on the internet, and actually it's used mostly for legal purposes these days, to go back and see what someone said 10 years ago. So I thought I'd do the same thing. I'd go back and see what I said 10 years ago. And I found a really interesting paper that I wrote in 2001, and it was about reusable content revolutionizing higher education. You know, I was 15 years younger, I guess, and probably a lot grayer, 20. And it was all about new pathways to learning for students. I couldn't believe how strident I was, you know. For most institutions, courses continue to be the standard use of instruction, the one-size-fits-all building blocks of academic credit, even within the virtual education arena. And by golly, they still are. And so it's really interesting that the whole view of education that we have is both personal and systemic and kind of cyclical. We revisit ideas from time to time. And at the time, the team that I worked with, we were building some really creative, innovative tools and applications to actually make this possible. And in fact, one of those people is now a big shot at Microsoft in Redmond, and another is a professor in the publishing program at SFU. And we really never did realize the dream we had in 1998. But it points to something that also skews our view. At the time, this was very much a technology innovation that was being foisted upon a bunch of academics we were expecting to take this and say, hey, this is fantastic, we're going to run with it and do some good stuff, and it's going to revamp our whole approach to education. But of course, education is an ecosystem. And it's a lot more complicated than simply the tools we use. And so the things we need to consider as we begin to bring innovations into the education system, open included, is how it affects that ecosystem and the activities that happen within it. If we look at the education system, we can start to build an ecological diagram of it. Learners generally enter our system with an objective, and we as educators try to help them reach an outcome. And along the way, they're part of a community of learners who are working together and learning together, and they're bound by rules, and there are various roles and groups they deal with, librarians and advisors and others, and various tools and systems that affect them. And so if we begin to think about harnessing innovations and localizing them in our institutions, it's not just the tools we have to pay attention to, it's the whole ecosystem, and we have to get that right. And a lot of it has to do with the conversations we have with people and the tone and style of those conversations. Kind of like what Cable did this morning. He really appealed to you on an ethical level to think about equity and access for students, something that we all believe in. So what is it in those conversations that make it work with other groups and within the institution who can help us move these innovations forward? And that's what I really wanted to talk about today. There are a number of transformative opportunities in front of us, and there's a whole bunch out there that are affecting the way we think about higher education these days. And one of them for me is collaboration, and that is, how can we be better at collaborating in a 2013 education system? And the transformative sweet spot that really begins to enable us to collaborate is that convergence of networked resources, digital resources, open resources, and they begun to coalesce into a transformative sweet spot that allows us to do things in ways we couldn't do before. Because it's digital, as Cable noted this morning, we're talking about bits, not atoms. They're easier to move around. They're cheaper to replicate. They're easier to duplicate. Because we live in a highly networked environment, we can distribute them to multiple devices any way we want. And with the advent of open licenses, we begin to be able to do that in a more legal and above board way than we might have in the past, not clipping photos from magazines and scanning them or doing any of those things. So there's a real opportunity that's in front of us, brought about by this convergence and this transformative sweet spot. Collaboration is not something that comes easily in higher education. And in fact, when the UK government took a look at what was happening across the United Kingdom 3 years ago, they found that many institutions were replicating what other institutions were doing, simply doing the same thing another way. Our way is the best. And they commissioned a paper called Collaborate to Compete. The notion of how can we still compete within a higher education system to differentiate ourselves, but collaborate on the services and the technologies that allow us to work together, keep our costs low, but allow us to keep with our focused mission as an institution and an organization. And what they said was, begin to look at realigning the structures and processes in your institution to take advantage of online learning, and consider new partnerships you might not have considered in the past. And we have some good examples of that here in British Columbia. But the private sector, where you'd think that competition was the raison d'etre, the driver of all industry and commerce, is also thinking about collaboration as being the new way to compete effectively. This from the Harvard Business Review just a couple of weeks ago. Clearly define what you want to do together. Transcend parochialism. Use data to inform your decisions. Tell people about what you're doing. Support the backbone. The people who make these innovations happen, especially collaborative ones, are very valuable to your organization and require continuous support and rejuvenation. If we take a look in British Columbia, for good examples of that, the best is the Center for Digital Media. 4 institutions, BCIT, Emily Carr, SFU, UBC, have come together to address a clear market need. Vancouver is seen as a hotbed of the film and animation and media industry. Each of those institutions had skills and attributes among its faculty that could be put together in an interesting building block sort of way to build something special that differentiated the academic partners, built engaging programs, and got the attention of industry. Those are the kinds of collaborations that really work. They build out something that is meaningful, that is innovative, and that serves a need in the market population. Ron Burnett, president of Emily Carr, was featured on the cover of the Georgia Straight this weekend on the theme issue on future learning. And the notion is to do the very same thing that was done with the Media Center for the art community, the actual art community in British Columbia. Begin to focus around a collaborative venture that brings multiple institutions together, that celebrates the artistic opportunities available through this kind of thinking. It's clear that in British Columbia, the big driver of opportunity in the college sectors these days is not what it used to be, programs and courses. It's jobs, programs, and courses. Jobs are the driver. Programs and courses are what enable students to get there. And we've got tons of market trend data and ways of providing information to students to drive these kinds of collaborative ventures forward. And the opportunity seems splendid here for you at Camosun to do some of that work. In the most recent round of the Online Program Development Fund, Camosun was funded for a bunch of trades programs that is going to build openly licensed collaborative materials to fund trades-based programming. And there's opportunities to do more and more of that. Our open textbook project that BCcampus is building is another example of the collaborative opportunity that is in front of us. Recently, we called for reviewers of open textbooks, and I think Mary told me this morning we have 36 of the 40 reviewers we asked for already. That is, people who want to review open textbooks, who will be paid to review open textbooks, who will then be asked to think about adopting or adapting open textbooks for use in their courses or programs. There are real opportunities for groups of faculty to work together to do this, to begin to build in a collaborative venture new textbooks, new resources that fit the actual needs of students in your courses or programs at your institution, or even more globally across multiple institutions. So there are some transformative opportunities out there based on collaboration. But there are also some very clear dynamics affecting everything we do. If you're a CIO or an IT person, the big imperatives these days are bring your own device to school. How do you manage the assets that are in an organization, and how do you make them accessible to any student who wants to bring their own device? How do you get better operational efficiencies? How do you transform the institution's business to make it more effective using technology? Everybody's being confronted by technology. If you're an instructor, flipped classrooms, massive open online courses, mobile applications, tablet computing, all of these are the factors that are beginning to push change from the outside in. Learning analytics, another of the factors that people are looking at. How do I tell when students are having success in my course? What are they having difficulty with? How do I adapt my course to better address those needs? The Horizon report that's published on an annual basis talks about some of the meta trends that are in the environment that are also forcing us to confront new ways of working. The notion of expecting to work and learn wherever you are. The notion of rich media being a preferred mechanism for people to get instruction these days. The notion of openness playing a role in the content and resources we provide. These are the kinds of trends that are pushing us to rethink how we work. Mobility is another factor that is starting to be noticed. From the Chronicle last year, 1/3 of all students transfer before graduating. Many head toward community colleges. Huge opportunity for community colleges. I was at the University of British Columbia last spring when Rob Fleming from the BC Council on Admissions and Transfer reported on the latest Student Transitions Project data. And there were gasps in the room when the figure 6,100 had transferred out of universities into colleges was mentioned. It was like, what? How could that be? But those are the figures. And a more recent reporting on those figures show the figures are actually bigger than that the flows among institutions in British Columbia shows that students are on the move all the time, laterally, into universities, out of universities. It's a very dynamic environment that we live and work in. And so understanding that everybody's on the move makes institutions think about how they attract them. One of the things that's happening is that everybody's going social. The big attractor is video. Douglas College has got a personal tour conducted by students. Fraser Valley's got one. Okanagan's got one. You guys probably have one too. Everybody's going social. Everybody's trying to attract. Everybody's trying to engage. This is one of the most interesting web pages I've ever seen from a university. Doesn't tell you anything about the president's trip to China. It's all about what do you want to do and how can we help you do it. Very unique. British Open University. Not only do they present an interesting front end to students, they give them a sampler online of all the courses they might want to take. Try one out for free. And if you like that one, you might like this one. And they've started to cross-link the information based on how students begin to navigate that site. Those are the kinds of intelligent ways that people are using the dynamics that are facing them. Massive and mobile are emergent themes. One of the patterns that started to emerge a couple of years ago and has gotten more and more intense is the notion of video as a preferred learning method. So you get things like EduFire, start learning on a topic of your choice. Unclasses, don't like anything we have, roll your own. Get your friends together, build a course. Unclasses.com. And then peer-to-peer university, where you actually start to take really highly organized courses and begin to be awarded badges for completion and competent displays of success in those courses. These are the kinds of patterns, though primitive looking now, are going to be the dominant forces as we go forward, and we need to learn some of these lessons. I usually drag this slide up when I want to make the point that what appears weird in the beginning often becomes mainstream in the end. A kid in his dorm, Boston College, builds a computer program to share music called Napster. Piracy looms its ugly head. At the time, Time magazine said, his program does everything a web application is supposed to do. It builds community, it breaks down barriers, it's viral, it's scalable, it disintermediates. And those are the qualities of building a learning community in the online space. So when you begin to take this technology and then put really high impact stuff on it, it really goes in new directions. But mobile learning is just a sliver of how we approach education in North America. 3% by the last survey of learning in North America occurs in a mobile environment. In Asia, 68%. It's huge, the difference. Africa, South America. So while we recognize the opportunity, we're not doing much about it. If you look at the subjects that are being taught in the online and mobile space, the dominant one is language education. Makes sense, right? Put on the earphones, listen to a native speaker, practice, makes sense. So we haven't done much, and we could do more, and so it's a latent opportunity. MOOCs are really capturing everyone's imagination right now. Is it because they're so huge? Is it because they're so easily accessible? Is it because they use video as the dominant method of teaching? What is it that has this appeal? Why are people going to them? If you look at the pitches of the primary providers, Coursera, Udacity, edX, it's all about convenience. It's all about rock star instructors. It's all about getting it to you when you need it, when you want to use it. Apparently, it is the future of online learning. But the big question that people are beginning to ask is it about depersonalizing learning and erring on the side of massive? Or should we be using technology to personalize the experience and build a lifelong learning community? Which of those seems to be the best pattern going forward? And massive has certainly one set of appeal. It's big, it gets to a lot of people. You can imagine if you lived in a developing world and you had no real access to education, that you might go to a learning center where computers and technology existed, where you could get access to learning materials. That would be a real opportunity for you. And certainly the statistics from MIT's Open Courseware project points out that most of the users are self-learners in the developing world. And the smallest percentage of users of MIT's Open Courseware materials, can you guess? MIT. Instructors. People aren't going there to find out what it is and how other people teach. It's really being used for self-learning. Open is a vector for change, for sure. And you only have to see some simple examples to understand why that's the case. Khan Academy is massive. Millions of people have used it for mathematics, science, biology tutoring. It's not a primary instructional tool. It's a 15 to 20 minute tutorial on specific single concept topics in math, science, physics, chemistry that people need to bone up on. I traveled in Mongolia last summer across the Gobi Desert with two young men who were from the Wharton Business School in Pennsylvania. And they said to me, "You heard of Khan Academy?" I said, "Yep." They're in the master's, the MBA program. We use that to cram for calculus exams. Khan Academy, Wharton Business School. The Ivy League is using Khan Academy. It's simple. It's direct. It's easily adaptable and localizable to other cultures and languages. My colleagues in Mongolia right now are translating Khan Academy videos into Mongolian, actually just putting a voice track over top of them. This one is in Arabic. What's become the most appealing option for open these days is high quality, affordable open textbooks. Affordable in the sense that they can be printed quickly, efficiently, and inexpensively. Open in the sense that you can use them on any kind of reader or device. OpenStax College has taken the approach of going for ultra high quality with 4 first-year courses in physics, sociology, biology, and chemistry. The strategy here is to demonstrate undeniably that the quality of an open resource can be equated to the quality of a publisher resource. But it's open, it's accessible, it's reusable, it's modifiable. If there was ever an opportunity for instructors in Canada to Canadianize textbooks, open resources would be the way. All the examples can be Canadianized. All of the things you normally want to do in your class can be done using open resources. BC's got a long history of promoting open development. From 2003 to 2012, we put $10 million into the BC post-secondary system and awarded many grants, over 144, with the participation of every institution, many partnerships, and almost every discipline covered by the developed resources. So even within British Columbia, without looking further afield, we can find many useful, reusable resources today in the health-related professions, in the sciences, in liberal arts and humanities. It's not as if people don't want to do it. They simply need to know about it. We probably haven't marketed it effectively enough. Our colleagues in Washington State have just completed 81 courses in their open course library. They had a press conference yesterday to announce it and to demonstrate that in its first 3 years of operation, it has contributed to $5.5 million in student savings through textbook purchases. Not an insignificant number. Student costs have gone way down. Student public interest research groups in the US have done a comparison of the cost savings when using various kinds of accessible open information, or accessible information not open. In the case of e-readers, 1% savings. Rentals, about 33%. E-textbooks, the kind that Cable talked about, here today, gone tomorrow. And open textbooks, 80% is the differential in savings when you begin to look at going in that direction. So it's no surprise that here in British Columbia we're pursuing an open textbook model. So if we're engaging students in different ways, who will engage students with a zero resource cost credential? Who's up for that? Lumen Learning, which is a foundation, is building something called Textbook Zero, a model for supporting institutions that want to move an entire degree program to using freely available OER. Could be a diploma, could be a certificate. And they're actively looking for willing institutions to support and work with them. That's zero cost. That would have a lot of appeal for students. You imagine students coming into a nursing program saying, come to our nursing program at Camosun, textbook cost is zero. Pick any program. Would that make you more competitive with your colleagues and partner institutions around the province? You need to ask that question. Textbook zero. Who will go to market with a zero cost credential resource cost for students? The other revolution that's occurring is in credentials. 10 years ago, John Seeley Brown and Paul Duguid wrote a book called The Social Life of Information. And they predicted that within 10 years, actually they wrote it in 2000, 13 years ago, they predicted that guild-like accreditation bodies would begin to emerge alongside universities and colleges. Places where you took your portfolio of accomplishments and your demonstrated set of clinical competencies, and they would be externally evaluated and you would be awarded a credential. About 3 years ago, a young woman in the US wrote a book called Do It Yourself University. The notion that if there's all this free material out there on the web, should you not be able to roll your own set of courses towards a credential and take it somewhere for evaluation? DIY you. So the question, is your institution ready to credential learning from other sources, even MOOCs? And what would it take for you to say yes? Colorado State is already doing it. Foreign students are very interested in the concept. Would you do it? Will you do it? Prior learning assessment is something that has been around as a concept for many years. It's kind of like a sine wave. It's up and it's down. Currently, it's on the upswing again. And prior learning assessment is really being looked at as a complementary piece to MOOCs. That is, if I take my learning externally on the internet, how do I take my set of competencies and learnings and demonstrate them to someone who will credential me? And there are lots of organizations gearing up to take on that challenge. If you look at Excelsior College in the US, already has a well-established network of credentialing and assessment centers across the US. There are lots of organizations that are looking at PLAR as the opportunity to move forward. What does that mean? It means that another technology that will start to raise its head again are e-portfolios, ways to document the learning you have and to demonstrate that learning to an accreditation and credentialing body. The newest concept is the Open Education Resource University. And it's really looking at this whole affordability and accessibility idea. That is, if learners can use courses based solely on OER, draw upon volunteers on the internet to help them with their learning, and pay for assessment from participating institutions who are willing to grant credit, they can start to work towards an accredited degree. And so in Canada, Athabasca University has said yes. Kwantlen Polytechnic University has said yes. Thompson Rivers University has said yes. And a whole bunch of other institutions across the world, essentially, are starting to look at this model to find an alternative pathway to higher education that's more affordable for students based on open resources. It's going to be officially launched in October 2013, right here in British Columbia at Thompson Rivers University. Brand new model. Even newer is the notion of badges. Instead of transcripts, badges. If you're going to learn somewhere on the web, and you can authenticate yourself as a real person, and you can demonstrate competency, why not get a badge? The question asked is, when was the last time you went to an employer who asked to look at your transcript? Do they ever look at your transcript? They do. What do they look at? Where you got it, when you got it? Grades? Okay, so it still has a role. Question is, are there alternative pathways that achieve the same thing, that are loaded into some mechanism that validates the learning? And the Mozilla Foundation is building the Open Badges framework to help facilitate that, because we know that a lot of learning that occurs these days is informal. It's happening outside the walls of the institution. And what would it take to satisfy the harmonization of the informal and the formal towards a credential? You can see that MOOCs, PLAR, OERU, badges, they're all kind of coalescing around that opportunity. So just in beginning to wrap here, how do we localize an open approach in your own institution? And what are the pieces of the puzzle you have to look at? This was written earlier this week, or last week actually. It's called 5 Hurdles to OER Adoption. We all can see the value in open. But one of the problems is that not all of our faculty members know how to work with it, where to find it, how to work with it effectively, know the value or quality of the resource, and institutional processes may not support those kinds of ways of thinking currently. So these are the big hurdles we have to clear. But we think there are some ways forward. And one of them is to participate in workshops, to learn from colleagues, to review an open textbook so that you actually have a first-hand opinion of its qualities, to adapt, adopt, or remix open resources. And BCcampus has been very active in running open textbook adoption workshops this year, moving this from the theory into the practice. How do you do it? And what does it look like when you do it? Students are also becoming active. Student public interest groups in the US are actually putting petitions together to ask faculty politely to consider open resources for courses at the same time that they look at textbooks available from publishers. And they're also suggesting that faculty begin to work with libraries to identify collections of open resources that can be used within the institution, because we know that libraries are a very effective mechanism for vetting resources. Tools. Creative Commons is already looking at ways of harmonizing search so that you can find the kinds of things you want from Google, from photo databases, from clip art databases, from music databases, from movie databases, so that the work of searching and validating what's open and what you can use is much more streamlined. We're looking at BCcampus at ways to remix, publish, share, and distribute. How do you take these resources in and manipulate them in a way that builds something that works for you and your students? So tools are underway to be built. Communities of practice are also active in these areas. The Educational Technology Users Group is very active in looking at the impact of open practices, but we hope that the University College Institute professional developers will also look at those. And there are plenty of guidelines and resource materials out about how to use open resources in higher education. Many of them published here in Canada, many of them free. The Commonwealth of Learning in Vancouver is a big source of those kinds of free and open how-to resources. Roles. Teaching and learning centers have a role, librarians have a role, everyone in the organization has a role. The Electronic Library Network already has a fantastic research service that students take part in called Ask Away. We're just implementing right away a tutoring service for students based on the same collaborative, collective model. What if we had another service that dealt with open resources that worked in a similar fashion across all libraries, building digital collections that worked for students and faculty? That would seem to be a way of getting at some of these roles. Rules. Articulation committees play a big role in all of this. And the question is, how do we take articulation committees into the game? Should they be adopting open textbooks and be part of the maintenance and sustainability process? Perhaps. How do we build institutional policy, provincial policy, national policy? There's already a commitment in British Columbia to push forward on open resources in the post-secondary sector. We need to work in all of these areas. It's an ecosystem. Boldness is required. None of this happens without proactive push. It's an ecosystem. Everybody has a role to play, and we need to find a way to enable the conversation with all groups in our system to make sure everybody understands the role of open resources in our schools. One of the most interesting presentations I've seen in a really long time was called Amazing Stories of Openness, and it occurred here in Vancouver a couple of years ago. And it was the opposite of what you might think. It was a presentation that occurred on the screen with people talking about their experience of sharing resources with colleagues and the opportunities it created for them for travel, partnership, funding, all of those things. It was like, I gave it away, and this is what happened. I asked people to work with me, I offered my stuff, and good things happened. Amazing stories of openness. Our colleagues in Great Britain had a similar idea recently to socialize ideas, to build a site where you could go and do some matchmaking, make your pitch for some ideas you'd like some help with, and begin to invite others to work with you to create and share and elevate the idea from simply a one-person idea to a much broader collaborative enterprise. They called it the elevator. We'd love to institute an elevator here in British Columbia where faculty and instructors or even students could begin to push ideas that they need to build or work on, a kind of co-design, frugal design environment. Your challenge is what one of our open textbook subcommittee members said. The reason I'm here at the textbook subcommittee is that I have a lust for equity. I want to make sure that all the good stuff that is available to all my students and to all my colleagues. And the question I have for you is, how do you begin to have that conversation with your colleagues, staff, and students about exploring a more open future? It's about this lust for equity. I encourage you to have that conversation. Thank you.